Hi everyone, my name is Greg. I'm 35 and I work as a research scientist at a research institute. I'm involved in quantum physics, to be more precise. It's an engaging but challenging job that requires total dedication. I often stay late into the night, spending days on end in the lab. Thankfully, my wife is understanding. She's from an academic environment herself, so she knows how it goes. Speaking of my wife, Julia and I have been together for 10 years now, having met in university. We're both physicists, both fanatics about our work. We got married right after graduation, deciding not to put it off. We've been inseparable ever since, through good times and bad, as they say. We don't have children, having dedicated ourselves to science. And I'm not even sure I'd make a good father. I have too passionate a nature, always caught up in my formulas and equations. Where would I find the time to think about diapers and onesies? In general, Julia and I lived as one soul. Of course, there were disagreements. How could there not be? But on the whole, I can't complain. Love, mutual understanding, common interests. Idyllic, nothing less. But last month, something unexpected happened. Julia was invited to speak at a major scientific conference in another state. A presentation, seminars, the whole shebang. The trip was planned for a couple of weeks minimum, possibly longer. Of course, I was delighted for my wife. What an opportunity, a chance to make a name for herself in the academic community. But at the same time, I felt a bit downcast. How would I manage without her for so long? I'd gotten used to her always being there, in the lab, at home, my support, my best friend. Julia was anxious too. She scurried around the apartment, packing her suitcases, muttering under her breath, "Greg, are you sure you'll manage? Maybe we should ask my mom to come over, help out around the house. I'm afraid to leave you alone. You'll starve or drown in your own mess." I waved her off, assuring my wife that everything would be fine. I'm a grown man, after all. I won't perish. I'm not a child. But deep down, I knew Julia was right. Without her, I was as good as helpless. Cooking, cleaning, all those little domestic things, not my forte at all. I'd always either burn the porridge or fade the laundry. And as for healthy eating and routines, forget about it. When would I have time for that with my workload? In general, the prospect of bachelor life did not thrill me. But there was no way around it. I had to support Julia. She was doing it all for our future. So I grit my teeth and put on a brave face. "Of course, my dear, everything will be just fine. Don't worry. Focus on the conference. I'll manage somehow. I won't fall apart." Julia sighed and shook her head. It was clear she didn't quite believe me, but she didn't argue. Only on her way out the door, suitcase in hand, she tossed out, "Watch yourself. Don't forget to eat on time. And don't spend nights at the lab. Come home at least occasionally. And you know what? I'm still going to call my mom. Let her at least drop by from time to time, or I'll never stop worrying about you." I rolled my eyes but didn't object. After all, what's the harm if my mother-in-law visits a couple of times? Susan and I get along well enough. She's a sensible, non-fussy woman. And she's a great cook, unlike my own culinary attempts. That's how we settled it. Julia left, leaving me to my own devices. And I plunged headlong into work. I spent days on end at the institute, forgetting about sleep and food. When the hunger became unbearable, I'd grab a donut from the vending machine and coffee from a thermos. But more often than not, I'd tough it out until evening, then dash to the Chinese place on the corner and grab a takeout box of noodles. A week passed like that. Short, weary calls from Julia. She's preparing her presentation late into the night, or she's out late with colleagues. I understood. I didn't take offense. I'm the same way, the easily engrossed type. I remember how many times my wife had to drag me out of the lab in the middle of the night, hungry, dazed. She'd scold me half-jokingly, feed me dinner, tuck me into bed. Those memories warmed my heart. Lord, I really did miss Julia. Her smile, her hugs, our leisurely evenings together. Maybe I was wrong to let her go alone after all. What if she found someone more interesting over there? It was in the midst of these gloomy thoughts and self-flagellation that Susan caught up with me. On the 8th evening, just as I was listlessly poking at some cooled noodles once again, there was a knock at the door. On the doorstep, my mother-in-law herself, radiant, fragrant, in a stylish pantsuit. In her hands, bulky shopping bags and a signature pie from our favorite bakery. "Hi, Greg," she trilled, beaming. I thought I'd come check on my favorite son-in-law. How are you holding up? Not wasting away from malnutrition, I hope." I smiled awkwardly in response, stepping aside to let Susan in. What a surprise in the evening, and there was no point in lying that everything was great. My mother-in-law would see right through it. She was too perceptive. "Well, I'm getting by," I mumbled, taking the bags from her. "Lots of work, you know yourself. No time for cooking and all that." Susan looked me up and down, clicking her tongue. She shook her head disapprovingly. "Of course I know. You'll turn into a skeleton on these snacks of yours soon enough. Good thing I thought to come by, or you'd have withered away completely." And she marched decisively into the kitchen, shrugging off her coat as she went. I trailed after her, secretly grateful for the unexpected care. It was nice, after all, to be looked after. Even if it was by my mother-in-law, whom I hadn't been particularly fond of before. It didn't take half an hour before a real homemade meal was steaming on the table. Susan had whipped up a quick pasta carbonara, a salad, and put a pie in the oven to warm up. The mouth-watering aromas made my mouth water. My stomach answered with a hungry grumble, and I realized I hadn't had a substantial meal since yesterday. "Come on, toss that undercooked noodle slop," my mother-in-law commanded, fishing a large plate out of the cupboard. "Sit down and eat properly. It's painful to look at what you've done to yourself." I didn't need to be told twice. I plopped down on a chair, grabbed a fork, and soon I was eating, with both cheeks bulging, squinting with pleasure. Lord, what a delicacy. Just plain old pasta. But it was like manna from heaven after all those semi-processed meals. Susan sat across from me, her chin propped on her hand. She watched me with a slight smile, but not without concern in her gaze. She caught my puzzled look and explained gently, "You look so thin, Greg, pale, haggard. You've worn yourself out with your work, with no one to look after you. Oh, what a mess." I finished chewing and leaned back in my chair, full and content. Well, yeah, I had lost a little weight. But you don't exactly get fat in academia. That was my Julia, the real trooper, working herself to the bone, yet still watching her diet and routine. A real woman, a real homemaker. Unlike me, a mere lab hand. "Oh, come on, Sue," I waved it off with a chuckle. "It's not that bad. You know I'm sturdy. I'll scrape by on biscuits for another week or two. I won't fall apart." My mother-in-law pursed her lips disapprovingly. She gave me a long, scrutinizing look. Then she sighed, got up from the table. "All right, I won't argue. But just so you know, I'll be keeping an eye on you from now on. I'll come by, cook for you, make sure you eat on time. Someone has to take care of you since Julia's not around." My heart skipped a beat. Well, how insistent she was, and there was no point arguing, no refusing, unless I wanted to start being rude, but I'm not one of those, and it would be silly, really, to refuse care when I could barely cope on my own. "Thank you, Sue," I mumbled, looking down. "You're a real friend. I don't even know what I'd do without you." My mother-in-law just waved it off, as if to say, what have I done that's so special? We're family, after all, one blood. And so Susan started dropping by regularly. Almost every day she'd come, either to bring lunch or to go grocery shopping. She'd fuss over the laundry and cleaning, grumbling good-naturedly about the mess. And I'd watch her and marvel. What a dynamo! Where did she get all that energy? Gradually, we grew closer. No longer mother-in-law and son-in-law, more like friends, buddies. We'd chat about everything under the sun, laughing over inside jokes. Susan would reminisce about her youth, recounting amusing anecdotes from her life. And I'd listen, all ears. Well, I hardly knew her at all before. Not her character, not her interests. I was ashamed, really. One evening we stayed up late. Susan had prepared an incredible lasagna. I'd brought a bottle of red wine. We ate unhurriedly, savoring every bite. And then we got to talking about work, about science, about the meaning of life. Susan listened to me attentively, nodding. She'd top up my wine, ask questions, and it was like a dam burst inside me. All my worries, my doubts came pouring out. I told her about Julia, about my fear of losing her, and about loneliness, about always having to be the brilliant husband. "Oh, Greg," Susan sighed when I ran out of steam, "it's hard for you, I can see that. You're striving for Julia's sake, bending over backwards. But when do you ever think about yourself?" I gave a bitter chuckle. She had hit the nail on the head, the devil woman. She had turned my soul inside out, down to the very bottom. What can I say? I said wearily, waving my hand. I'm to blame myself. I wanted a family, a career, and now I'm torn in two. I'm just rushing to keep changing masks. One moment the perfect husband, the next a brilliant physicist. I can't even remember my real self anymore. Susan covered my hand with hers. She gently squeezed it, stroked my knuckles with her thumb. From that simple caress, my chest warmed. It had been so long since anyone had pitied me, comforted me, probably not since childhood. Don't worry, Greg. We'll get through this, my mother-in-law said with confidence. You're strong, you'll manage, and I'll help however I can. After all, we're family. We have to support each other. I nodded gratefully, and it was true, thank you to her. For everything, for the help, for the understanding, for fussing over me like a child. Such things aren't forgotten. They're worth their weight in gold. And so we sat until late into the night, drinking wine, baring our souls. At some point, I caught myself thinking that I felt incredibly at ease with my mother-in-law, as if we'd known each other 100 years, as if we were kindred spirits. I didn't even feel that kind of absolute, unconditional openness with Julia. We finally got ready for bed when the clock struck 2. Susan insisted on going home. She had a million chores in the morning, she said. She needed to get some sleep. I didn't argue. I called a taxi, helped her into her coat. As a goodbye, my mother-in-law impetuously hugged me. She pressed against me for a moment, exhaling into my neck. Take care of yourself, Greg. And remember, I'm here for you. Always. My throat tightened. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I stood in the doorway, watching the departing car. My chest ached with a strange, wistful feeling, as if I had lost something important, something dear to my heart. That's how I went to bed, enveloped in a vague unease. I tossed and turned sleeplessly for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock. And towards morning, I drifted into a restless doze, and I dreamed of Susan, cheerful, understanding, the closest person in the whole wide world. The next few days flew by in a haze. I plunged headlong into work, hardly ever showing up at home. I'd call Julia, report on my progress. She'd be happy for me, saying everything was going great for her too. The conference was dragging on. She was making new connections, getting offers of collaboration. I'd listen to my wife and try to be happy for her. But deep inside, an unpleasant, slimy feeling was stirring, as if Julia was somewhere out there in another world, without me all on her own, and I was alone here like a stray finger, abandoned, unwanted. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I missed Susan. I missed our heart-to-heart conversations, her warm care. Several times I caught myself reaching for the phone. I wanted to call her, invite her over. Just like that, no reason. But each time I'd stop myself. No, it's wrong. This is my mother-in-law after all, my wife's mother. That's how I tormented myself, torn between duty and the call of my heart. But when one evening Susan showed up on my doorstep herself, I nearly went crazy with joy. "Hi, Greg," she trilled, beaming. "I thought I'd check on my favorite son-in-law. You must have worked yourself to the bone by now." I froze in the doorway, devouring my mother-in-law with my eyes. Lord, how I'm at a loss for words. It was as if the sun had burst into the house, instantly making everything warmer and brighter. "Sue, what a surprise," I breathed, stepping aside. "Come in, of course. You have no idea how glad I am to see you." And I wasn't lying, you know. I really was overjoyed. My mother-in-law went into the living room, kicked off her shoes. She plopped down on the couch, stretching her legs out with pleasure. "Whew, what a day! I don't think I've been this tired in 100 years. Do you mind if I spend the night? I just don't have the energy to drag myself home." My heart leapt with delight. Spend the night? Here? It was like a holiday. "Of course, Sue," I exclaimed, not hiding my joy. "Stay for a week if you'd like. I'm all for it." My mother-in-law giggled. She gave me a sly wink, waggled her finger at me. My, don't get too excited. Aren't you afraid Julia will get jealous? She is your wife, after all, the lady of the house." I waved it off. What nonsense. What did she have to be jealous of? Susan was practically a second mother to me. Well, she'd help out around the house, cheer me up. What was wrong with that? "Don't be silly, Sue. We're friends," I said casually. "Julia will understand. She's a smart one." "Yeah, sure, she'll understand. If only I had known then what that friendship would lead to. How I'd have to twist and turn later. Oh, Greg, when will you ever wise up? But at that moment, I wasn't thinking anything like that. I was just enjoying Susan's company, her easygoing manner and infectious laughter. We talked late into the night, watched old comedies. We laughed until our sides ached, recounting our favorite scenes. And when my mother-in-law went to bed, I sat alone in the dark for a long time. I listened to her steady breathing from the next room, and I felt my lips curl into a smile of their own accord. Imagine that, how little it takes sometimes to be happy. A beloved woman nearby, even if she is your mother-in-law. Warmth, peace, serenity. That's how I fell asleep right there on the couch. And in the morning, I woke up to the intoxicating aroma of coffee. Susan was puttering around in the kitchen in a light robe, her hair tousled from sleep. She was humming something under her breath, fussing over the stove. When she saw me, she beamed, "Good morning, sleepyhead. Hurry up to the table before it gets cold. I made your favorite pancakes." My heart swelled with tenderness. Imagine, she remembered. I stood in the doorway watching my mother-in-law, and I felt something warm and tender spreading through my chest. Home, family, care, the very things I had been missing all this time. Then Susan turned around. She caught my gaze, frowning in puzzlement. "Why are you just standing there? The pancakes are getting cold, by the way. Or don't you like the coffee?" I snapped out of it. Good Lord, what was I thinking? I had completely lost my mind in this loneliness. A little more and I would have started professing my love. Fie, what a disgrace. No, everything's great," I mumbled, sitting down at the table. "I was just lost in thought. Thank you, Sue. You're a wonder, honestly." My mother-in-law waved it off. She sat down across from me, propping her chin on her hand. "Eat up. You need your strength, scholar. Julia will be back soon, and you're as thin as a rail. It's painful to look at." I snorted. "Yeah, right, like I'd get thin with breakfast like this in the morning." A little more and I wouldn't fit through the door. But I didn't say anything out loud. I just ate and smiled, listening to my mother-in-law's chatter. And a strange, unbidden thought kept spinning in my head. How wonderful it would be if Susan stayed forever, just like this, in joy and sorrow, to greet me from work, to cook delicious meals, to be there, to support me, to love me. Fie, what nonsense! I must have completely lost my mind over this stress. How can I even think such things? She's my mother-in-law, my wife's mother. Shame and disgrace, honestly. That's how I spent the rest of the morning, battling with myself. Then I got ready to go to work. Susan wasn't going to linger either. She cited some urgent matters, said she didn't have the strength to drag herself home. As I was seeing her off, I fidgeted at the doorway. I wanted to say something important, something meaningful, but the words seemed to get stuck in my throat, refusing to come out. "Well, take care, Greg," my mother-in-law smiled goodbye. "Don't mope without me, for God's sake. Julia will be back soon. Everything will be great." I nodded, mumbling something incoherent. Yeah, of course, Julia would come back, and everything would be as before. Work, home, rushing around, no heartfelt conversations, no friendly support. And only after closing the door behind Susan did I suddenly realize with absolute clarity, I didn't want everything to be as before. I wanted my mother-in-law to stay. For us to keep on like this, casually, familiarly, sharing joys and sorrows, supporting each other. Oh, Greg. And what do I do now with this feeling? How do I deal with this uninvited, improper fondness? Just my luck at my ripe old age. The week before Julia's return flew by in the blink of an eye. Susan and I saw each other almost every day. We went to the movies, strolled in the park. We chatted about everything under the sun, laughing like children. I felt like a mischievous schoolboy playing hooky, light, happy, full of energy. My mother-in-law seemed to have grown younger too. Her eyes sparkled, a flush played on her cheeks. She looked at me with such warmth, such tenderness. Something fluttered in my chest, constricting with a tender ache. Lord, what was this? Where did this strange, inappropriate attachment come from? One evening we stayed up late. We drank wine, listened to old records. Susan reminisced about her youth, her unfulfilled dreams, and I watched her, beautiful, wise, understanding, and I couldn't get enough of her company, couldn't be satiated by it. "Sue, I'm so glad you're here." The words slipped out involuntarily. "You have no idea how much you mean to me. If it weren't for you—" My mother-in-law looked up at me in surprise. She frowned, biting her lip. She said softly, seriously, "Greg, Please don't say what you'll regret later. We can't, you understand? I swallowed a bitter lump. I understand, Sue. Oh, how I understand, but the heart wants what it wants, even if it's wrong, even if it's forbidden. And if I don't want to be silent, I suddenly blurted out in a hoarse voice, if I don't give a damn about anyone else, Lord, Sue, I'm going crazy. I think about you day and night. I miss you when I don't see you. This is abnormal. It shouldn't be like this. My mother-in-law recoiled. Panic, confusion swam in her eyes. She shook her head, stammering brokenly, No, Greg, no. Come to your senses. What are you saying? We're relatives. You have a wife, my own daughter. This can't be, you hear? It's wrong. It's filthy. I flared up as if stung. Filthy? So that's how she sees it? In my opinion, there's nothing purer or more beautiful than this feeling. Yes, it's forbidden. Yes, it's unacceptable. But who said true love always follows the rules? Who said you don't have to fight for it? You know what, Sue? I gritted through clenched teeth. To hell with the rules. To hell with morality, decency, and all that nonsense. I love you, you hear? I love you so much it hurts to breathe. And I don't care that you're my wife's mother. I don't care about sideways glances and gossip. I want to be with you. I want to fall asleep and wake up next to you. Don't you feel the same? Susan froze, staring at me in shock. Tears glistened in her eyes. Her lips trembled. She reached out, touched my cheek. She whispered hoarsely, Greg, my dear, how can you not understand? I love you too. I didn't expect it from myself, but that's how it is. Only we can't. We have no right. Think about Julia, about our family. We'll destroy everything, betray those closest to us. It was as if a weight had lifted off my soul. She loves me. She admitted it herself. She wasn't afraid. So it wasn't all in vain. My torment wasn't for nothing. Since we've fallen in love, so be it. We'll be together, in spite of everything and everyone. I pulled Susan towards me, hugged her until her bones creaked. I buried my face in her soft hair, inhaling the familiar scent. I whispered feverishly, Don't be afraid, my love. We'll manage. We'll definitely manage. We'll go far, far away, start a new life. Just you and me, no one else. Isn't that happiness, to be with your loved one? My mother-in-law sobbed. She wound her arms around my neck, pressing herself against me. She looked me in the eye, resolutely, firmly. Yes, Greg, that's happiness, real, hard-won happiness. And we'll fight for it, no matter what it costs. Because there's no other way now. Because we love. After that, it was like a spell came over me. I pulled Susan down onto the couch, no longer able to restrain myself. I hungrily pressed my lips to hers, feeling her whole body responding. She arched into my embrace, clawing at my shoulders through my shirt in the throes of unbridled passion. What happened next should never have happened. We merged in a passionate embrace, forgetting the whole world. It was madness, absurdity, a son-in-law and mother-in-law entering into a forbidden affair. But at that moment, nothing else mattered except our true feelings. We came to our senses only in the morning. We lay on the rumpled bed, sweaty, damp with tears. Susan buried her face in my shoulder, softly sobbing. She mumbled guiltily, God, what have we done? How can we look Julia in the eye now? She'll never forgive us. She'll never understand. How can a daughter accept such a thing? I stroked my mother-in-law's hair. I kissed her tear-stained cheeks, salty with tears. I whispered confidently, She'll forgive us, Sue. She'll definitely forgive us. You'll see. Julia is smart, kind. She'll understand that this is real, that we didn't do it out of malice, not to spite her. Love simply proves stronger than us, that's all. I believed it weakly myself, if I'm honest. But I comforted her as best I could, encouraged her. After all, fate is the culprit. It brought us together, tangled us up, scorched us. Now either put on a breastplate of crosses or put your head in the bush. There was no third option, as they say. Susan sniffled. She propped herself up on her elbow, looked me in the eye. She said resolutely, Well, Greg, it seems the time has come to pay the piper. We'll explain ourselves to Julia, beg for forgiveness. Maybe she'll understand, forgive us in time. And if not, so, whatever. We can't do it any other way. I could only nod. I hugged her tightly, burying my nose in her temple, and I thought feverishly, Come what may, 2 deaths cannot be, 1 cannot be avoided. We'll endure somehow, we'll cope, for the sake of love, for the sake of our happiness. We fell asleep only towards morning. And during the day, there were preparations, a call from Julia. I said I'd pick her up from the airport, take her home. My voice was only trembling treacherously. I couldn't steady my agitation. My wife was surprised, but didn't show it. She was happy, my poor darling. I felt so ashamed. Oh, if only you knew, my dear. What was making your husband tremble, what he was preparing for, you'd probably drop dead on the spot. We went to the airport together with Susan. The whole way we were silent as partisans. We only held hands, tightly, painfully, each of us thinking our own thoughts, wondering how it would turn out, what would happen now. Oh, if only we knew in advance. But who would tell us? Who would advise us? Julia emerged from the terminal, beautiful, radiant. She flung herself around my neck, peppering both my cheeks with kisses. She twittered excitedly, fired up. "Greg, my dear, how I've missed you, if only you knew. So much has happened, so much is new. You simply won't believe it." I hugged my wife. I pressed her to me, stroking her back. I looked over her shoulder at Susan, pale, lost, and my heart clenched with a sharp, tender tenderness. For both of them, so dear, so beloved. Lord, what did I do to deserve this? What sins am I atoning for? Julia pulled away. She shifted her gaze to her mother, frowning in bewilderment. "Mom, why are you so gloomy? Did something happen while I was away? Or are you just tired from looking after Greg?" Susan shuddered. She stretched her lips in a pained smile, stammered falsely. "No, of course not. Everything's fine, sweetheart. I was just nervous waiting for you. I really missed you, that's all." And she rushed to hug her daughter. She squeezed her until her bones creaked, burying her face in her hair, and her shoulders were trembling slightly, as if she had a fever. It was clear. She was holding on with her last strength, the poor thing. Any moment she might burst into tears from guilt and shame. My heart bled. I stepped towards them, hugged them both tightly. I gathered them into my arms fiercely, painfully, and I almost sobbed myself. I could barely hold back. It's hard lying to the dearest people, to look them in the eye and know that you have betrayed them, shattered their fragile family peace. "All right, enough crying, my girls," I boomed cheerfully. "Let's go home. We'll chat on the way. Julia has so much to tell, I can see." My wife nodded. She picked up her suitcase, headed for the exit. Susan and I exchanged a mournful, hopeless glance. "Oh, Sue, what are we doing, huh? Julia will never forgive us, never. How can we look her in the eye now?" But there was nothing for it. We trudged after her, keeping our distance. In the car, Julia chattered like a magpie, about the conference, about her new acquaintances. I nodded, mumbled in agreement randomly, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, catching Susan's sad gaze. And I thought feverishly, what do we do? What's next? Are we really going to dare to confess everything? To destroy what I've been building for years? My marriage? My family? My trust? We arrived quickly, as if only a moment had passed. I parked near the house, turned off the engine. I got out, grabbed the suitcases. Julia was twittering, laughing. She was beaming like a newly minted coin. Clearly, she had missed us. And I wanted to lie down and die, to disappear into the ground, vanish without a trace. Anything to avoid seeing her happy, unsuspecting face. We entered the apartment in a crowd. Julia kicked off her shoes, plopped down on the couch. She stretched out contentedly like a well-fed cat. She said dreamily, "Oh, how wonderful to be home! No more hotels, strange smells. Greg, my dear, how I've missed you. You and Mom. It's good that you supported each other, or I'd have gone crazy from loneliness and longing." Susan and I froze as if struck by lightning. We exchanged a staggered, frightened glance. Lord, if only you knew, Julia, if only you knew what that support had led to. Here we shouldn't be worrying about longing, but tearing our hair out, from guilt, from the realization of our vileness. But aloud I said nothing. I smiled with trembling lips, mumbled something incoherent, and I went to the kitchen, supposedly to make tea, to indulge my wife after her trip. But I was trembling all over. I was disgusted with myself to an impossible degree. "Oh, Greg, you've really gone too far, you scoundrel. Now you'll never wash away your guilt. You'll never atone. Unless you fall at her feet, begging for forgiveness. But will we even be forgiven? That's the question." The next few days passed in a fog. Julia and I hardly spoke, just about business, about trivial nonsense. My wife seemed to sense something was off. She kept glancing at me suspiciously, but she didn't ask questions. Either she was tired from the road, or she was just afraid to hear the truth. And I had completely lost my head. I scurried about like a madman. I couldn't find my place. I kept thinking, what do I do next? How do I untangle this knot of lies and betrayal? I loved Julia. I really did love her, and I still love her in my own way, deeply and tenderly. But Susan, Lord, for her I'm ready for anything. To throw it all to hell, to start from scratch. Just as long as she's by my side, just as long as she doesn't let me go. One evening I couldn't take it anymore. I called my mother-in-law, asked her to come over. I said there was something important, a very serious matter. It couldn't be put off. I felt like hanging myself. Susan rushed over immediately. It was clear she had also been tormented, yearning terribly. She burst in like a whirlwind, threw herself around my neck at once. She hugged me, whispering feverishly, "Greg, my dear, if only you knew how I missed you. I almost went crazy. I only thought of you. How you were doing without me, what you were thinking about." I pulled her to me. I buried my face in the top of her head, inhaling that familiar scent. I mumbled hoarsely, brokenly, "And I missed you, Sue. Terribly, unbearably. It seemed like a little more, and I would start howling from longing. I can't go on like this anymore, you understand? Without you, without your love. Come what may, I'll leave Julia, I swear. I'll accept whatever her decision, just as long as you're by my side." Susan pulled away. She looked at me distrustfully, even fearfully. She shook her head, sobbing convulsively. "Greg, come to your senses. How can you leave? What about Julia, your family? You love her. You've been together for years. Think carefully. Is it worth destroying what you've been building for years? Greg, come to your senses. How can you leave? What about Julia, your family? You love her. You've been together for so many years. Think carefully if it's worth destroying what you've built for years." I groaned. I pulled my mother-in-law close, pressed my lips to hers in a hungry kiss. Susan gasped, melted in my arms, and I kissed her fervently, selflessly, as if for the last time, saying goodbye forever. I knew I wouldn't let her go. No way I'd let her go, even if the whole world turned against us. My woman, my love, to the end, to the last breath. "I love you, Sue," I rasped, barely tearing myself away from her lips. I didn't expect this from myself, but here it is. Yes, I'm a scoundrel. Yes, I'm the lowest bastard. But I can't do otherwise, understand? I want to be only with you and to hell with everyone else." Susan sobbed. She hid her face on my chest, shaking with silent sobs, and I stroked her hair, whispered something stupid, incoherent, comforting, calming. Although I was beside myself, my heart was pounding like crazy, my temples throbbing. I was terrified to the core, to goosebumps. I knew there was no going back, only forward, on the edge of a knife. With my beloved, but against everyone. We stood embracing like that, for a long time, an eternity. And then Susan raised her eyes to me, tearful, determined. She said quietly, firmly, "Okay, Greg, I'm with you, you hear? To the end, whatever happens. Let's talk to Julia. Confess everything. She'll understand. She can't not understand. After all, we're all human. We all have the right to make mistakes and to have real feelings." I closed my eyes. God, is it true? Is she really ready to risk everything? For me? For us? Oh, Susan, Susan, I love you, woman. All of you completely. And I don't care that you're my wife's mother. I don't care that it's wrong and immoral. You can't command the heart, can you? "Thank you, darling," I whispered in a breaking voice. "You have no idea how much this means to me. I promise everything will be fine. We'll manage. We'll definitely manage. Because we love, because we're together." And then, well, then you can guess for yourself. We talked to Julia, openly, honestly. We confessed everything, hiding nothing. My wife listened silently, without interrupting. She only bit her lips until they bled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. God, how ashamed I was. I wanted to fall on my knees before her, beg for forgiveness. But can such a thing be forgiven? Can it be understood and accepted? When we finished, Julia was silent for a long time. She sat motionless, staring at one spot. And then she raised her eyes to us, empty, frozen. She said in an alien, colorless voice, "Well, I understand. Thank you for telling me. You're free. Do what you want, live as you know how. But excuse me from this nightmare. I can't. I don't want to participate in it." And she went to the bedroom, quietly, without slamming the door, like a shadow, like a ghost. And we were left sitting, crushed, destroyed. We understood this is the end of our marriage, our family. We destroyed it ourselves, we buried it ourselves. And now we have to face the consequences. Now we have to answer for what we've done. What happened next, I won't tell. Why reopen old wounds, pour salt on bleeding cuts? I'll just say that Susan and I left, away from gossip and judgment, from sidelong glances. We started a new life, together without looking back. It was hard. Oh, how hard. At times it seemed, that's it, I can't bear it. I'll die of shame from guilt. Before Julia, before everyone. But we managed, we endured, we persevered. Because we loved, because we believed. In ourselves, in each other, in our right to happiness. Even if it was hard-earned, even if it was paid for at such an exorbitant price. 5 years have passed. We live quietly, peacefully. We work, we go on vacations, we enjoy every day, every minute together. Of course, all sorts of things happen. We argue and make up. But not once, hear me, not once, have we regretted our choice. Because we know it's the only right one. Because it's impossible any other way now. We don't communicate with Julia. We just occasionally inquire about her health through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, she's doing fine, not in need. She even got married again, can you imagine? Yes, quite recently. To a good man, a reliable one. God grant her happiness. Give her strength to forget and let go. After all, she deserved it. She deserved it like no one else, with her generosity, her kindness. Well, that's probably all. That's the story, friends. Instructive, damn it. I told it as it is, without embellishment. Judge if you want, sympathize if you want. I'll accept any reaction from you, any opinion. After all, do I have the right to expect anything else? I made this mess, I'm dealing with it. Why did I decide to share? I don't know, to be honest. I guess it just built up. I wanted to speak out, to pour out my soul. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.